Hi, I'm Dan Prince, and we're at the Peninsula Fine Arts Center looking at a show of outsider art entitled How Artists See Their World. And right here in the lobby, you run into the first painting, which is Raindrops Falling on the Desert by Robert Margulies. These are very large raindrops, and they're very colorful. And some of the original people that were looking at light, Sir Isaac Newton, Goethe, were looking at prisms and how light is refracted and reflected by water. So as fanciful as these raindrops look to us in this Margulies piece, and colorful and fun, they actually do reflect certain of the scientific principles of how a prism has multicolors as light hits something like a raindrop on the desert. As we come into the Ferguson gallery, we see a prime example of things, in this case furniture, that's done by Robert E. Smith. So he has to envision how these things are going to be designed and fit together, and then he has to paint them. However, I don't think he integrates the decoration with the actual furniture objects. So you get the preservation of the functionality of these things as furniture and things that predominates, but is on the edge with this sort of over-the-top decoration as well. So a lot of these artists keep a separate pathway for the decorative on one side and then the functional on the other side. And where they merge is sort of this, not harmonious, but sort of vying for your attention line. And that's what Robert is, very aware of. Not so much composition and harmony, but of having all of these elements sort of just crashing together. As well as the childlike exuberance of a Robert E. Smith, there are people in this field who are diagnosed with specific mental conditions like obsessive compulsive. And Stephen Ryan seems to be one of these people as he toils in the library for 8 hours a day doing these very intensely detailed drawings. Here we see eyeballs, and they have dates under them, double dates, one in red, one in black. The first one on this eye was 2/16/1976, and then he came back to finish it on 12/28/1976, about 10 months later. And each one of these is double dated, where he improved upon that. One might say of Stephen Ryan's work, okay, he's obsessively or compulsively doing sketches all the time, and they're not necessarily supposed to have a context. So here we see in transition into a landscape section his use of a person, but the person is objectified, both by not really communicating to us, in fact having her back turned to us, and she's more interested in looking into the landscape, so that points us into a context and a direction. We can see his meticulous detail and his use of composition in this work, but I think that something that really stands out still is his sort of talking about, through these images, his expressiveness as an artist and not having a direct conversation with us, and thereby making all of these things objects, even this person. Some of our artists are better at thingness than explanations because they really are not very verbal. Harold Angel is one of these artists. He did allow as how, when I was questioning him about this piece, that it was not any of these words that were down here, but it reflected a witch's cauldron. So we can see not only the thingness, but the feeling of heat and fire and all these vapors coming out of the cauldron. In this case, our thing is a duck, and it's contained within a TV set. So the containment forms an objectification process in and of itself, and that it removes us one extra step from the duck. Now, the containment here is seen in this patterned, almost theatrical sort of ruffle that's going on, and then continues into the tiger stripes. But if we think about the visual system in our primitive ancestors, they would have had to be very sensitive to a tiger coming out of the woods to get them, and their key to that would be these sort of stripes. You probably have a second and a half maybe to decide as your limbic system kicks in and adrenalizes you as to whether you're going to fight that tiger or flee. You probably don't have too much more time than that. So within that really direct, immediate time frame, you have to recognize objects and react to them, and this comes through our evolutionary past. In this bird picture, we see a very clear, dark, black outline of a bird, and it became very clear both from the survival standpoint and just from a standpoint of making your way through the world and having the security of being able to identify objects that, and things and animals that you could draw a very quick outline, which is that thing, as opposed to background, which is a place. When you can simplify and break these things down into simple identifiable shapes, you get a very recognitive sort of patterning out of these outlines, and that not only forms a gestalt, which we can understand, but also makes for a lot of drama by the artist within the picture frame. We're in the Ascending Gallery at Peninsula Fine Arts Center, and there's 60 portraits along these walls. Many of these portraits don't have the formal and almost static kind of composition of real formal portraiture, but they fall into a category of existentially showing how people are in those in-between moments. We can actually see the characters thinking. We don't know what is on their minds, but we know they're just about to do something, they're reacting to something else, or they're trying to find a heightened sense of what to do or of themselves. Paula Rath, for instance, was having his dinner served by a waiter, and his parents said, "That waiter is so nice." But he looked at the waiter as he turned away from them, and he said, "No, he's not. He's sneaky." And so he captures that and other people's in-between moments. We see various of the artists having a smoke. They're thinking while they're smoking. We have stills from movies even done by Justin McCarthy in the 40s, and there we see his characters not being over theatrical, but actually having that slightly withdrawn thinking posture as well. So a lot of these portraits, whereas they're not, overly dramatic, really do exemplify the human condition. Here we see Freddie Bryce's couple in an animated conversation. A little farther down the Ascending Gallery, we have William Laga and his scene from the Romeo and Juliet series of chatting her up. And we see a man sort of over-aggressively approaching a woman. Their intimacy and closeness is almost claustrophobic. And so through simple spacing, we can see, the intensity of their relationship. Freddie Bryce here has a couple in animated conversation. This doesn't accurately have to be exactly that man, and this red-haired woman will be indelible for her red hair, but the relationship between them, he being super aggressive, her being apprehensive, comes out loud and clear and is generalized as the sort of maybe conflicts that men and women have, and I think the artist shows them better in some ways, and his objective is to show them better in many ways than the actual portraiture itself. In the Halsey Gallery, we have figures, and it's very interesting the way that outsiders do their figures. They don't want them necessarily to extend fully into space. That's why they seem kind of flattened. And our first recognition of people coming at us or going away is really their motion. But when you fix the motion and stop it, the figures flatten against the background. And they would be boring because they're just sitting there. They're not doing much at that flattened point. But the way these artists handle it is they're really focusing on the bodies. That's where the motion is in a figure. And so you often find these foreshortened legs, which puts them off balance. And so the head and the body, which are the two most important things for that initial early recognition, are leaning forward toward you. And then you get an idea of what is important about the figure for the outsider. They want to see the facial expressions first, and they want to see any intent in the body, especially from our evolutionary past, again, as to whether the person is friend or foe. So that is the nature of the figure with the foreshortened legs and the top-heavy bodies that we see throughout this gallery.